The first thing Ethan registered was the ache behind his eyes, a dull throb that pulsed in time with the slivers of morning light cutting through the blinds. His body felt foreign, a leaden weight tangled in the sheets. He reached for his phone on the nightstand. The screen glowed 8 a.m. He burrowed deeper, pulling the comforter over his head to cocoon himself in darkness. A familiar voice, low and laced with amusement, sliced through his stupor. It remarked on his monopoly of the blankets, questioning what its owner was expected to do. Ethan froze. The voice was uncannily like his stepbrother's, but that made no sense. He sat bolt upright, the comforter pooling around his waist, and stared at the source of the sound. A lean, naked man was sitting on the edge of his bed. For a disoriented second, admiration warred with confusion. Then, the reality of the situation crashed down. A sharp cry escaped him. He demanded to know who the man was and what he was doing there, his voice cracking with panic. He instinctively moved to leap from the bed, but a sudden awareness of his own nakedness stopped him cold. A hot flush of shame crept up his neck under the other's calm gaze. Wordlessly, he pulled the comforter back up to his chin. The man, now clearly identifiable as Caleb, rose from the bed without a trace of self-consciousness. He moved to Ethan's closet with an easy familiarity, pulling out a faded t-shirt and a pair of jeans. As he dressed, unhurried, he asked if Ethan planned on getting dressed as well, suggesting a white shirt would look good on him and offering to get it. Ethan's mind reeled. He felt a surge of frustration, thinking that the immediate priority was not his wardrobe. It was clear that Caleb was not going to address the central, terrifying question. A sick feeling began to curdle in his stomach, a misplaced guilt that he had somehow instigated this. Caleb interpreted his silence as a refusal and reached for the clothes he had tossed on the bed for Ethan. Ethan's hand shot out and grabbed them. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to quell the storm in his chest, and told Caleb to get out so he could get dressed. Caleb's response was a soft, chilling statement about reciprocity. Since Ethan had seen him, it was only fair. The argument was so absurd that Ethan's resistance crumbled. He pulled the t-shirt over his head, then realized his predicament. He asked for pants, the kind one could wear outside. Caleb simply pointed to the briefs lying on the bed, his expression making it clear he saw no issue. Realizing the futility of arguing, Ethan put them on and walked, bare-legged, to the closet to find a pair of jeans. He was acutely aware of Caleb's eyes fixed on him, a silent, unnerving scrutiny that followed him until he was fully dressed and had escaped to the living room. He sank into the worn cushions of the sofa, trying to piece together the night. The most logical conclusion was that they had slept together. But if he had been the one to initiate it, why did his body feel so strangely uncomfortable? A terrible premonition began to form. He looked up at Caleb's handsome, impassive face. He asked if they had slept together. Caleb nodded. He then asked if he had been the one to initiate it. Caleb shook his head. A final, dreadful question hung in the air before he forced it out. Had Caleb slept with him? Caleb nodded, then shook his head again. The ambiguity was maddening. Ethan grabbed a throw pillow and hurled it at him, demanding a straight answer. 2 words from Caleb clarified everything. You were on top. A wave of relief washed over Ethan, but it was short-lived. The physical discomfort still made no sense. He wondered if he'd been too aggressive, somehow hurting himself in the process. Caleb's next words, delivered in a quiet, almost gentle tone, shattered that illusion. I was inside. The world tilted. The statement echoed in the sudden silence of the room. He reminded Caleb, his voice trembling, that he was his brother. How could he? Caleb simply took out his phone and played a recording. Ethan's own voice, slurred and compliant, filled the air. He was heard agreeing to give Caleb anything he wanted for his birthday. Caleb's voice then asked if anything was truly on the table, and Ethan's voice had confirmed it. The recording stopped. Fragments of the previous night surfaced. Caleb's birthday party. The relentless rounds of drinks from his friends. The feeling of being unsteady on his feet. The world blurring at the edges. Caleb leading him away. He remembered Caleb asking for his birthday gift, but the critical moments remained a void. Seeing the confusion still on Ethan's face, Caleb opened his phone's photo gallery. A video played. 2 naked bodies, intertwined. The person on top was unmistakably him, but the sounds were not of dominance. His own voice, raw and hoarse, could be heard pleading. He begged Caleb to stop, reminding him that he was his brother. There were broken promises and whimpers, the sound of his own voice calling out a name in a desperate attempt to make it stop. The sight and sound of it sent a hot, mortifying blush across his face. He lunged for the phone. Caleb switched it off with a smirk, watching Ethan's frantic struggle with detached amusement. After a brief, useless scuffle, Ethan collapsed back onto the sofa, defeated. There was a fresh mark on his neck from where Caleb had bitten him. He asked Caleb if he was some kind of animal. Caleb's reply was that he would be whatever Ethan wanted him to be. Overwhelmed and unable to process the violation, Ethan fled. He spent the next week hiding out in his dorm room on campus. Caleb's smiling face haunted his waking thoughts. He found himself thinking that if they weren't who they were, if they weren't Caleb and Ethan, maybe something between them could have been possible. But they were brothers, their names linked on official documents, family. He had watched Caleb grow up. It was impossible. His phone rang, startling him. It was his stepmother, Sarah. Her warm voice asked if he was coming home for dinner that weekend. She mentioned that it had been a while, and that Caleb missed him. The name sent a jolt through him. He wanted to refuse, but the genuine care in her voice, a care she had always shown him, made it impossible. He promised he would be there on Saturday and ended the call. A heavy feeling settled in his chest. He forced himself to leave the dorm and head to the campus dining hall. Caleb attended the same university, 2 years behind him. He'd been avoiding all the common areas, having his roommate bring him food. As he got his tray, his roommate, Mark, clapped a heavy arm around his shoulders. Mark was a loud, friendly jock, complaining that his own friend had ditched him for a girl and insisting Ethan join him. Ethan nodded, too weary to object to the casual physical contact. They had just sat down when a familiar figure slid into the seat directly across from them. Caleb greeted Ethan, his voice a low thrum, but his eyes were locked on Mark's arm, which was still draped over Ethan's shoulder. The atmosphere grew thick with unspoken tension, though Mark seemed oblivious. He cheerfully asked Ethan if Caleb was a friend, commenting that they seemed to be in the middle of a fight. Ethan just stared down at his food, pretending not to hear. Caleb calmly took out his phone. A moment later, Mark's phone rang, and he excused himself with a quick apology. Ethan started to get up to follow him, but Caleb held up his own phone, a clear, silent threat in the gesture. Defeated, Ethan sat back down. He ate quickly, aware of Caleb's unblinking stare. In his haste, he swallowed a piece of ginger from his stir-fry and began to cough violently. Caleb was instantly there, handing him a bottle of water. One of his hands steadied the back of Ethan's head, while the other tipped the bottle to his lips. The sharp taste was washed away, replaced by the choking sensation of too much water. When he finally caught his breath, he looked up and met Caleb's gaze. It was intense, filled with an emotion that looked disturbingly like devotion. The handsome face, a face that perfectly matched every aesthetic preference Ethan had ever had, left him momentarily speechless. Caleb broke the silence, asking if the person who just left was his roommate, Mark. He stated plainly that he was jealous because Mark had put his arm around him. A cold suspicion crept in. Ethan asked how he knew Mark's name, as he'd never introduced them. Caleb's expression was earnest as he denied investigating him. Then, with a deepening smile, he added that he had been following him. He said he knew Ethan was avoiding him, and that it hurt him, but it didn't matter. He would always find him no matter where he went. The final words were delivered with a chilling seriousness. Ethan felt a surge of anger and fear. He called Caleb a psycho, reminding him again of their relationship, that they were brothers on paper and he should stop his delusions. In a fit of rage, he threw the remaining water from the bottle at Caleb's face. Water dripped from his hair, and for a moment, he looked strangely vulnerable. It might have been a trick of the light, but it looked as if a tear traced a path down his cheek along with the water droplets. Then Caleb moved. He closed the distance between them, pinned Ethan's head, and kissed him. The kiss was deep and demanding. Just as Ethan's mind began to go blank, Caleb's tongue pressed against his lips with a soft, persuasive whisper for him to open up. The shock jolted him back to reality. He kicked Caleb hard, sending him stumbling back. The look in Caleb's eyes was now one of pure, unrestrained obsession. Ethan scrambled away and ran, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes in the crowded dining hall that had just witnessed their bizarre encounter. Predictably, a photo of the kiss spread across campus. Two men kissing in public was still enough to cause a stir. His academic advisor called him in for a private meeting, gently suggesting that while he couldn't control their adult lives, they needed to be more discreet. Ethan could only think of the irony. Discretion was the last thing a maniac like Caleb was capable of. He took a 2-day leave of absence and stayed at a friend's place, carefully timing his departure for when he knew Caleb would be in class. Saturday arrived too quickly. With a heavy heart, he went home. The moment he opened the door, his stepmother, Sarah, greeted him with her usual warmth, ushering him toward the sofa while she finished up dinner. His breath caught in his throat when he saw Caleb already sitting there. The living room was cluttered, and his father occupied the only free armchair. Caleb was tucked into the corner of the large sofa, with a small, deliberately empty space beside him. His father gestured toward it, telling him to squeeze in next to Caleb. Reluctantly, Ethan sat down. Immediately, Caleb's hand found his, hidden from view. Ethan tried to pull away, but his father's voice boomed, asking if he had ants in his pants and telling him to sit still. He froze, letting Caleb's fingers intertwine with his. His father asked a few perfunctory questions about his classes, but Ethan's answers were distracted, his mind consumed by the pressure of Caleb's hand. Losing interest, his father went to the kitchen to help Sarah. The moment he was gone, Ethan stood up and yanked his hand free. As he faced Caleb, he noticed for the first time how unwell he looked. His face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes and chapped lips. An involuntary question about his well-being escaped Ethan's lips. Caleb looked up at him, his expression one of profound sincerity, and said he hadn't slept in 2 days. He asked if Ethan could find it in his heart to care. For a moment, he looked like the young, innocent boy Ethan remembered, the one who used to follow him everywhere. Ethan's resolve softened. He told Caleb he should get some sleep and eat after he woke up. The guilt was a familiar weight. This was the boy he had raised. But Caleb pleaded, saying he wanted to eat with his brother. His eyes grew moist, and he looked heartbreakingly pathetic. Ethan's tone softened further. He agreed, but on the condition that Caleb went straight to bed after the meal. Caleb pushed his luck, asking if he could sleep with Ethan, pleading for him to take pity. Before Ethan could respond, his father's voice called out from the kitchen, once again telling him to sit still and learn some composure from his younger brother. Sarah's voice followed, chiding her husband for nagging. Caleb pressed his advantage, his voice a desperate whisper, asking if it was okay. He reminded Ethan of their childhood, of how they used to sleep in the same bed all the time, and asked if Ethan didn't want him anymore. The old memories flooded back. When their parents were busy building their business, Caleb had been left in Ethan's care. Caleb had been a sensitive child, terrified of abandonment, clinging to him constantly. The familiar question triggered an automatic response. Ethan assured him that of course he wanted him, that he shouldn't think such things. A satisfied smile touched Caleb's lips as he took Ethan's hand and led him to the dining table. Dinner was a surprisingly harmonious affair. Caleb and Sarah kept piling food onto his plate, and their cheerful chatter filled any potential silence. Afterwards, Ethan announced his intention to leave, but Sarah insisted he stay for an afternoon nap before driving back. After some gentle persuasion, he agreed. When he turned to go to his room, he realized Caleb had vanished. A sense of foreboding washed over him. Sure enough, when he entered his bedroom, his sheets and mattress were soaked. Caleb appeared in the doorway, the picture of innocence, claiming he had accidentally spilled a large glass of water. Sarah followed, sighing with mild exasperation and offering to change the sheets. Caleb interjected, pointing out how much trouble that would be, and that there were no spare comforters. He suggested that Ethan could just share his bed, as his was large enough for two. Seeing the logic in it, and with no other dry bedding available, Sarah agreed. Just like that, without saying a word, Ethan's afternoon was decided for him. Inside Caleb's room, Ethan stood stiffly by the bed and told him to get in and go to sleep. Caleb obediently climbed under the covers, his eyes fixed on Ethan with hopeful expectation. Ethan sighed, pulled a chair over to the bedside, and sat down. He promised he wouldn't leave. Caleb reached out, grabbing Ethan's arm and holding it tight as he drifted off, mumbling for Ethan not to leave him. Watching the younger man sleep, a mess of conflicting emotions churned inside Ethan. This was the person he had raised, now grown into this complicated, obsessive man. How was he supposed to handle this? He couldn't just throw away his parents' feelings and engage in this madness. He had considered loving Caleb, but he couldn't do it recklessly. Several days passed without any direct contact. Ethan tried to resume a normal campus routine. Class, dorm, repeat. He knew it was a one-sided silence. Caleb, with his obsessive nature, was surely still watching him from a distance. He thought that perhaps this was a manageable truce. As long as the stalking remained passive, maybe they could coexist. One night, just after he'd fallen asleep, his phone buzzed. The caller was Leo, one of Caleb's closest friends, the one who had pushed the most drinks on him at the birthday party. Leo's voice was frantic, barely audible over the noise of a bar. He said Caleb was drunk and out of control, and that he couldn't call his parents this late. He begged Ethan to come pick him up. Ethan rubbed his temples, a bad feeling creeping in. He told Leo to just take Caleb to his place and he would check on him in the morning. There was a pause, then a shout from Leo's end. He was yelling at Caleb not to jump, to calm down. He urged Ethan to hurry, screaming that Caleb had lost his mind. He glanced at the clock, 3 a.m. Knowing Caleb's capacity for extreme behavior, Ethan threw on his clothes and rushed to the location Leo sent. When he arrived, he found Caleb lying in a large decorative fountain, soaking wet. Leo was trying to pull him out without success. Seeing Ethan, Leo looked relieved, quickly explained the situation, and then vanished. Ethan approached the fountain and reached for Caleb, who thrashed wildly, shouting that Ethan didn't want him anymore, so he might as well die there. Ethan soothed him, promising that wasn't true and urging him to get out of the cold water. Caleb sat up, his face puffy, and asked if he was telling the truth, accusing him of lying because he had been ignoring him. Ethan apologized, admitting he was wrong, and pleaded with him to get out of the fountain. This time, Caleb complied, letting Ethan pull him to his feet. Soaking wet, Caleb threw himself into Ethan's arms, sobbing that he shouldn't be ignored. Ethan pushed him back gently, took off his own jacket, and draped it over Caleb's shivering shoulders. He bought a towel from a nearby convenience store and began to carefully dry Caleb's hair. He reassured him again, promising he wouldn't ignore him anymore. The drunken Caleb was like a child, his behavior regressing to petulant demands. He asked if Ethan would give him anything he wanted. Ethan, distracted by the task of drying his hair while Caleb fidgeted, agreed absently. Caleb pointed a shaky finger at the sky and declared that he wanted the stars. Ethan took a deep breath, patiently explaining that he couldn't get the stars and asked him to pick something else. Caleb's next words were spoken with a dead-sober intensity. "Then I wanna fuck you." Ethan was sure he'd misheard. He asked him to repeat it. "I wanna fuck you, Ethan. I wanna sleep with you." He then tried to bury his head in Ethan's chest, a 6-foot-plus man acting like a toddler. Ethan shoved him away, throwing the towel in his face. His voice was cold as he said he never should have come, that Caleb could have stayed in the fountain all night for all he cared. Caleb's sobs stopped abruptly. He stood silently, tears streaming down his face. Ethan, watching the lost-looking figure, decided to call Leo back and leave. But in the next second, Caleb sprinted toward the nearby bridge. Before Ethan could react, he was climbing over the guardrail. Ethan's heart stopped. He ran faster than he ever had in his life. Caleb was now standing on the narrow ledge outside the railing, the dark, rushing river below him. He screamed that since Ethan didn't want him, he should just die. Ethan's voice was choked with tears as he begged him to come back, promising he wanted him. A small crowd of late-night passers-by had gathered. Some tried to reason with Caleb, while others offered unsolicited advice to Ethan, telling him to just agree to whatever the kid wanted to get him off the ledge. Caleb's voice cut through the noise, declaring that he didn't believe Ethan, that nobody wanted him. Ethan desperately tried to convince him otherwise, swearing that he would never leave him. Caleb then laid out his terms, telling Ethan to promise him. Promise him everything. The onlookers urged him on, their voices a chorus of panic. Looking into Caleb's eyes, seeing not drunkenness but a terrifying, focused mania, Ethan slowly closed his own. He agreed. He told Caleb to come back over the railing, and he would agree to anything. Caleb climbed back over. The crowd dissipated, their drama over. He walked slowly toward Ethan, backing him up against a wall. He pinned him there with his hands and kissed him, a kiss that was not drunk and desperate, but possessive and triumphant. Ethan closed his eyes in resignation, a single tear tracing a path from the corner of his eye. Caleb saw it and his demeanor softened instantly, his touch becoming gentle as he wiped it away. Exhausted, Ethan finally voiced the thought that had been screaming in his mind. He asked Caleb what else he was capable of, the drinking, the fake drunkenness, the suicide threat. It was all an act. He remembered then that Caleb had an impossibly high tolerance for alcohol. He had never seen him truly lose control, not even the time he'd had to be treated for alcohol poisoning. Caleb's answer was a plea. He begged Ethan to be with him, claiming he would go insane without him. Then he dropped to his knees, tears flowing freely. The boy he had raised for more than a decade was kneeling before him, begging for his love. The world felt absurd, tragic. He was a complete madman. Ethan asked, his voice hollow, what would happen if he refused. Caleb's response was simple and absolute. Then he would die. His life had no meaning without Ethan. The threat was not a bluff. He was obsessive, sick, and entirely capable of it. Ethan gave in. He told him they would do it, but their parents could never know. A light ignited in Caleb's eyes. He scrambled to his feet and wrapped Ethan in a fierce hug, whispering a not to betray him, or he would die. Ethan returned the embrace, his movements stiff. He suggested they find a hotel, as the dorms would be locked. Caleb led him by the hand to a nearby motel. He handled the check-in as Ethan was in a daze. He told Caleb to shower first while he went out to buy him some dry clothes. When he returned with a shopping bag and opened the door to their room, he stopped dead. It was a themed suite. A large, round waterbed sat in the center of the room, and the entire ceiling was a mirror. He felt a desperate urge to flee. Caleb emerged from the bathroom with a towel around his waist, his eyes locking onto Ethan like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. The door clicked shut behind Ethan. The lights dimmed to a warm, suggestive glow. He was pushed onto the bed. Looking up, he saw their reflection in the mirror above as Caleb began to remove his clothes. He protested, saying he couldn't do it there, not like that. He struggled, but Caleb easily pinned his wrists. He took out his phone and played the recording of Ethan's promise from the bridge. He told him it was no use fighting, that he had agreed. The sheer, cold calculation of it, to have the presence of mind to record their conversation during a supposed suicide attempt, was staggering. Unable to watch the scene unfolding in the mirror, Ethan squeezed his eyes shut and begged Caleb to at least turn off the lights. Caleb didn't answer. His hands moved faster. Ethan felt like an object, powerless to resist. A sudden, intrusive touch made him cry out. Caleb's voice was a harsh command, telling him to open his eyes, to watch. When Ethan refused, whimpering, Caleb threatened him with something worse. Left with no choice, Ethan opened his eyes, forced to witness his own violation in the reflection above as tears streamed down his face. The night was a long, humiliating ordeal. He woke in the afternoon, his limbs sore. Caleb was already awake, watching him with that same intense, proprietary gaze. The memory of the previous night was a fresh wound. Ethan turned his back to him. A moment later, Caleb spoke, his voice low and husky, telling Ethan that he was hard again. Ethan feigned sleep, but he felt Caleb begin to move against him. The movements grew more insistent. Ethan finally broke, pushing him away and glaring at the insatiable man before him. He told Caleb to control himself. Caleb's expression immediately shifted to one of wounded vulnerability. He asked if Ethan didn't love him anymore. The silent, accusatory question hung in the air. Caleb continued, his voice taking on a pathetic tone, speculating that Ethan must have someone else, that he didn't care if Caleb lived or died. He reasoned that it was only natural for Ethan to not love a man, and that perhaps he should just die and stop being a nuisance. The melodramatic monologue was escalating. Exhausted by the emotional whiplash, Ethan threw his arms out and fell back against the pillows in a gesture of complete surrender. He told him he could have one more time, but he had to be quick. The man who had been contemplating his own demise moments before was now grinning in triumph. It was clear he would do or say anything to get what he wanted. Afterwards, lying in Caleb's arms, Ethan's mind raced. He had agreed to this. He was as insane as Caleb. They were family even without a blood connection. Caleb was young and reckless, but Ethan was an adult. He shouldn't be indulging this destructive fantasy. He tried to rationalize it. Their parents didn't know. Caleb would likely get bored after a few years, and then they could go their separate ways. A few years of madness seemed manageable. Their new relationship made Caleb even more possessive. He followed Ethan everywhere. To class, to the dining hall, back to the dorm. He even followed him to the bathroom, where they stood staring at each other under the harsh fluorescent lights. Ethan asked him if he could possibly be less of a creep and give him some privacy. Caleb just smiled silently and shook his head. When Ethan threatened to break up with him if he didn't leave, Caleb vanished instantly. Ethan sighed. The boy was crippled by insecurity, constantly terrified that Ethan would disappear. Soon, all of Ethan's friends knew Caleb. When they asked who he was, Caleb would always jump in before Ethan could answer, proudly declaring himself to be his boyfriend. Ethan would silently swallow the word brother. Before long, the rumor that Ethan was gay was common knowledge on campus, a development that seemed to please Caleb immensely. The real problem started when other men began to approach him. Ethan's looks, as his roommate Mark had once put it, appealed to everyone. Before, the men who were interested had been hesitant, thinking it was wrong to try and turn him. Now that he was officially out, they saw an opportunity. One after another, they tried to steal him away. He found a love letter tucked into his textbook and immediately threw it in the trash on his way to meet Caleb. As he neared Caleb's dorm, he saw a group of guys arranging candles on the lawn. Curious, he wandered closer. They were debating the most romantic arrangement, a heart or a name. Seeing the white candles, Ethan paused and asked them if they were preparing for a memorial service. The group fell silent, staring at him, dumbfounded. Just then, Caleb came downstairs, and Ethan, forgetting the bizarre scene, went off with him to get dinner. In the dining hall, while Caleb was feeding him a piece of broccoli as if he were a child, he casually asked if they should make their relationship public. Ethan, knowing exactly what he meant, played dumb, pointing out that all his friends already knew. Caleb's expression darkened. He accused Ethan of never intending for them to be together permanently. Ethan told him not to be greedy, that he wasn't a child anymore. Caleb fell silent, then muttered something too quiet to hear. They walked back toward the dorms in a tense silence, though Caleb never let go of his hand. A large crowd had gathered around the spot where the candle arrangers had been. Drawn by the commotion, Ethan pulled a sullen Caleb into the throng. A man in a suit was kneeling on one knee, holding a bouquet of flowers, surrounded by a heart made of red candles. He was kneeling in front of the men's dorm. The crowd was cheering as the man raised a megaphone to his lips and shouted, "Ethan, I love you. Be with me." The energy was infectious. Ethan found himself getting excited for the brave suitor. Caleb's face, however, grew darker with every cheer. He grabbed Ethan's arm and tried to pull him away. Just then, the man in the suit turned his head and saw them. "Ethan, don't go. I'm serious." The name, clearly directed at him, extinguished all of Ethan's excitement. He tried to leave quickly, but Caleb, who had been silent for an hour, finally erupted. He stalked over to the suitor, snatched the flowers from his hand, and threw them to the ground. He declared that Ethan was his boyfriend and accused the man of being a homewrecker. A fight was about to break out. Ethan rushed to hold Caleb back, but Caleb turned his fury on him, pulling him into another brutal, public kiss. When it was over, the kneeling man stood up, a sneer on his face. He scoffed at the boyfriend claim, pointing out that everyone knew Ethan was his brother. He asked Caleb what he could possibly offer that he couldn't, sneering that at least he and Ethan weren't on the same family register. That was the last straw for Ethan. He pushed Caleb behind him and faced the suitor. He asked him if he had any concept of respect, or if being a pathetic third wheel was some kind of niche fetish. He finished by saying he had no interest in degenerates and dragged Caleb away from the scene. In a quiet corner, he gently stroked Caleb's hair, reassuring him. Caleb hugged him tightly, asking for confirmation that they would never be separated. Ethan didn't answer, just held him. The incident blew up. Their relationship was now public knowledge, and he was summoned to his advisor's office again. This time, the advisor was more stern, telling him their flagrant behavior was having a negative impact on the school's reputation. The following weeks were difficult. Everywhere they went, they were met with stares and whispers. He heard the word disgusting more than once. For Ethan, who had always been a model student, the condemnation was crushing. Caleb, however, seemed unaffected, constantly trying to comfort and protect him. In those moments, their roles reversed, and he became the strong, supportive older brother. Eventually, as with all campus gossip, the furor died down. People lost interest. He thought they had finally weathered the storm. But fate had another cruel joke to play. On a normal weekend visit home, they walked in to find a funereal atmosphere. Sarah's eyes were red and swollen from crying. His father sat on the sofa, chain-smoking in a room thick with haze. On the coffee table, laid out like exhibits, were photos. The picture from the dining hall kiss months ago. Recent photos of them holding hands on campus. Ethan's blood ran cold. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ethan, did you like my gift? Leave him and be with me." Caleb saw the photos and immediately stepped in front of Ethan, facing their parents. He stated that he started it, that they had never been there for him when he was growing up, so they had no right to dictate his life now. Sarah looked at her son with empty eyes. She had always tried to make up for the years of neglect, treating Ethan as her own. Now, her biological son and her beloved stepson were together. She was caught between her love for them and the societal taboo, paralyzed by guilt and horror. His father stood up and slapped Caleb across the face. He moved to strike Ethan next, but Caleb blocked his arm, telling his father to hit him instead, that he had forced Ethan into it. Sarah finally spoke, her voice a fragile whisper, asking to speak with Ethan alone. Caleb grabbed Ethan's hand, begging him not to go. Ethan pulled away and followed his stepmother into her bedroom. Inside, Sarah knelt before him. He tried to pull her up, but she refused, so he knelt down with her. Through her sobs, she pleaded with him. She reminded him that he was the older brother, that she didn't want to separate them, but they were family. Outside the room, they could hear the sickening thud of Caleb slapping his own face, over and over, kneeling ramrod straight on the living room floor, begging his father to agree. The house was a portrait of a family tearing itself apart. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan emerged from the bedroom. He saw Caleb still kneeling and forced himself to look away, walking straight out the front door. The moment he was outside, the tears he had been holding back streamed down his face. He ran, desperate to escape. He heard Caleb chasing after him, ignoring their parents' shouts. He ducked into a dark alley and watched as Caleb ran past, searching frantically. Then he turned and walked in the opposite direction. He knew he was a coward, but what choice did he have? He couldn't watch their family disintegrate, couldn't bear to see Sarah consumed by grief, or worse. The title of older brother came with a burden of responsibility. He had to be the sensible one. He took an extended leave from school under the pretext of an off-campus internship. He got a new phone number, telling only his father. On the 10th day of hiding in a rented room and drinking himself into a stupor, his father called. His voice was weary, broken. Ethan, he tried to kill himself. 2 bottles of sleeping pills. He took them all. The phone slipped from his hand. The alcohol haze vanished. His father texted him the hospital address, and he ran out the door. The traffic was gridlocked. He abandoned the taxi and ran through the streets, a single thought pounding in his head. He had to see him. At the hospital, Sarah was a crumpled heap on the floor outside the emergency room. His father, aged 10 years in a single day, squatted beside her. When Sarah saw Ethan, she grabbed onto him, her voice a desperate, repetitive chant. She kept saying she agreed that it was all okay now, asking him to promise her that Caleb would be all right. He held her, trying to offer comfort he didn't feel. The light above the door turned green. Caleb was wheeled out, a tube down his throat, and taken to the ICU. The doctor's words were cautious. His condition was stable, but whether he would wake up was up to him. Sarah fainted. Standing outside the ICU, looking at Caleb's still form amidst the machinery, Ethan was consumed by a tidal wave of regret. If only he had been braver. If he hadn't run away. He whispered through the glass, his voice thick with unshed tears. He begged Caleb to be strong, promising they would never be separated again. He asked how Caleb could bear to leave him alone. He confessed his cowardice, vowing that he would never run again, that they would face everything together. Caleb's finger twitched. 2 days later, Caleb was moved to a regular room. While rolling up his sleeve to adjust his fore, Ethan saw them. A dense network of scars crisscrossed his forearm. Some were old and white, others were newer, angrier pink lines. Caleb quickly hid his arm under the blanket, whispering for Ethan not to be disgusted, that they would heal. The sight broke something inside Ethan. He choked back a sob, apologizing for being a coward. Caleb reached out, his voice weak, and told him not to cry. He said Ethan's reaction had been normal, and he never blamed him. All that mattered was that they were together in the end. Their parents, consumed by guilt, only dared to visit when Caleb was asleep. 3 days later, he was discharged. The sunlight was bright as they left the hospital. Caleb smiled at him and said, "I found you, brother." Ethan knew what he meant. That day in the dining hall, Caleb had promised he would always find him. He had made good on his word, using the most twisted, desperate means imaginable. He had succeeded. Ethan leaned in and kissed him. Hidden in the shadows, their parents watched, their faces a mixture of relief and sorrow. Ethan took Caleb's hand and started walking toward their car. Caleb, however, pulled him in a different direction, towards their parents. He apologized to them for the worry he had caused. His stepmother, her voice trembling, said all that mattered was that he was alive. His father added that if they were happy, they should be together. They weren't related by blood after all. That night, they stood on the same bridge as before. The river flowed peacefully below. Caleb admitted he couldn't remember exactly when he had fallen in love with him. Maybe when he was 12 or 16. He just knew he had. Ethan asked if they should have their names legally separated from the family registry, so they could just be lovers, not brothers. Caleb shook his head. He said that as long as they were together, it didn't matter. This way, if anything ever happened to Ethan, he would always have the legal right, as his brother, to be there for him. Ethan smiled. It was true. Spouses shared a household registry, too. They had survived the rumors, the parental disapproval, the near tragedy. There were no more obstacles, no more reasons to hide. He was a madman, but he was Ethan's madman. There would be no more running. Their future, once a terrifying unknown, was now theirs to create.